the Wellness Weekly podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Christian Dominique, and today we have a very special guest with us. We are here with Andrée Kenny from living in the United Kingdom at the moment. She is a ADHD and dyslexia coach at Neuro Pathways, a holistic practitioner who specializes in ADHD, dyslexia, and emotional regulation, supporting individuals to build inclusive systems that enhance well-being, performance, and retention. Thank you so much for coming on our podcast today. I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you. I've said this before, but I was diagnosed, like many other kids when I was younger, with ADHD. I took medications for years. I learned how to cope and adapt without the medications, but it's certainly been a struggle. So I'm sure that I can learn a lot from you today, and a lot from how you've helped other people in your practice. And thanks again so much for coming on the podcast.
Having me on the podcast, and thank you for sharing that, Mark. I wasn't aware of that. So.
Absolutely, yeah. So I always ask people, I'm very curious how they initially got to do what they're doing, their career path, and perhaps you could just give a little background on how it came to be that you are an ADHD and dyslexia coach. What led you to this?
I suppose diagnosis of both the conditions or traits, neurotypes. I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 30. And I think when I was first diagnosed with that, I felt there was very little in way of helping me move forward with my dyslexia. When I was diagnosed with my ADHD, again, I found the same kind of system there. There wasn't much to help me. So I did a bit of research, and I saw there was coaching. Also, you could do, I suppose, therapy. And I think for myself, when I reflected back in, knowing there was very little to help with a lot of the executive functioning, that prefrontal cortex, the planning, the timing, that aspect to it really rung true with the coaching. So that's why I ended up being a dyslexic and an ADHD coach.
Thanks for sharing, Andrée. It's interesting to have, personal story. I'm also neurodivergent, so we can definitely understand. And to be clear, I would say that everyone is neurodivergent, right? So in some ways, every brain is different. Mark and myself are neuroscientists, and love to talk about the brain and how it affects behaviors, emotions, cognition, as you mentioned, the prefrontal cortex. And there is, something to be said about the evolution of, what ADHD is. We'll talk more about still some preconception of, disease model, disability model, and how we can, try to convey that we all have different brains, and we have all different ways of learning, of seeing the world, of perceiving or sensing. And can you tell us a bit about your journey of discovering that?
I suppose we go back to when I was diagnosed with dyslexia. I always kind of knew that, I suppose, my retention of information, I kind of really did find that challenging. So when I was diagnosed, I had this feeling of, I feel I'm not stupid. I actually cried at the time, if I'm honest. And it explained a lot in terms of how I used to study at school, and how I was always putting in extra time to keep up. When I read, things would bounce on the page. When I wrote, I'd miss out a word here or there. So that was a real awakening for my brain. Fast forward to, I think, kind of around COVID and lockdown, and I had to be re-diagnosed with dyslexia for a second time because I didn't have any paperwork to show I had dyslexia for an exam. But in doing that, I was also diagnosed with TCD, dyspraxia, the old term. And I can see why I was actually diagnosed with that. I have probably scars from head to toe. They used to call it, which was probably terrible, the clumsy child syndrome. But yes, I can see I used to trip over my feet. There was plenty of things that had gone on over my life. And during COVID and lockdown times, I ended up giving myself a rather bad injury where I had to be brought to hospital. I lost a lot of blood. I won't go into it. But I was with a neurodivergent group in London, and one of the women on that group said to me, "Andrée, do you think you've ADHD?" And I said, "No, I've dyspraxia." And she said, "I think you should get diagnosed for ADHD." I think I was a little taken back because my perception then was that ADHD is this hyperactive little boy bouncing off the walls. And even though I was kind of taken back, there was something caught my attention in what she said. So I started researching, and about 2.5 years later, I got the diagnosis. And it was actually the psychiatrist said to me, "You knew you had this before you came." And I said, "Yeah, I'd done so much research, I wasn't surprised at all that I had it." And I'd also realized at that stage there's a big crossover between dyslexia and ADHD.
And dyspraxia as well. So thanks.
So,
Yeah, thanks for the story and the realization and the support you had along the way. For the audience, dyspraxia is maybe a term that is less commonly used or understood. Can you explain what you've learned about dyspraxia to the audience?
Yeah, so dyspraxia is I suppose, I don't want to say a lack of coordination, but your coordination isn't as it probably should be. There's prior perception, which I believe is like kind of, holding space in an area and actually holding things. I often drop cups and glasses, they just slip through my hand. It's like my brain isn't acknowledging that it's there. But you also have executive functioning, I want to say, challenges as well. So for me to plan and organize things, sometimes this can prove to be a little bit more challenging, let's say, at times. But yeah, it's out of the three of them, it's the one that's probably less known and less, I would say, less courses to explain what it is.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And if you're in the audience and you've had some of those, you hear yourself in those words or this conversation, maybe you're not alone. And again, it's not about diagnosing or a disease model where your label is this or that, and this plus that or minus that. We know that the brain also has neuroplasticity, and some things can change. And there's many things that we'll talk about today that can help people with different brains and for different reasons. So thanks for sharing. We will talk later about, you mentioned, being diagnosed late and why sometimes girls and women are diagnosed later than men. We'll talk about that in a later segment, and we'll also talk about the comorbidity or having many different signs of it, again, simply different brain. So thanks, Andrée.
So I would like to come back to something that you said. You said before you had your ADHD diagnosis, the psychiatrist said you already knew that you had ADHD. What were some of the, I guess, obvious signs, symptoms that really tipped you off before you went to the psychiatrist?
I think for me, it was kind of timekeeping. Although I wasn't, I would say, very time blind, because I'd worked with the airlines and I'd worked with the Japanese, so therefore timing was kind of a little bit better. But like planning, organizing things, sometimes I would really struggle in these areas. Let's give it an example. So leaving the house in the morning to go to work, I would think, oh, I need an hour to have my shower, get myself ready and get myself out the door. But by the time I get downstairs, it's probably an hour, and then I'm looking for my bag, my handbag. I'm looking, where are my shoes? Where's my phone? So that kind of lack of organization and being able to get out the door and plan everything in a timely manner was one of the main things for me. And what was the other thing? I think because at this stage I knew the dyspraxia was tied in. So I used to trip over a lot and I often miss door frames. I actually walk in to the door frame. So yeah, I think that all kind of tied in with it, and it could make it quite funny at times.
Well, yeah, we had an episode on April 1st talking about the different types of laughter and how laughter is good for connection in the brain. So, if you're doing clumsy things or things happen, better laugh at it. We completely agree.
Totally agree.
So to go back a little bit for the audience, I did some research that we can, look at actually the evolution of the science of dyslexia. Then we'll go back to ADHD, but I thought that we've talked, and ADHD is very known. There's a lot of talk about it, but we'll give a different approach. But let's dive in a little bit on dyslexia. If we want to look at the first paper that I found, this is Schmaltz et al., and this talks about looking at how so the old definition of dyslexia was looking at how learning is a deficit, right? And how we can look at it as a deficit. But even that, here this paper says that a systematic review could not even prove conclusions of the presence of the absence of an effect, right? So we're trying to define something as something that's a deficit, but it's not clear how. So that's, the research about 10 years ago. And then more recent findings and discussion. So if you want to share the next paper, is kind of revisiting the definition of dyslexia, right? So this is more recent, 2024. And we're looking, again, we talked about comorbidity. So we're figuring out that the brain acts, there's genetic markers, there's areas of the brain that are affected in similar ways and that can be looked upon as classified conditions, right? Again, looking about developmental disorders and highlighting some of the deficits as we talked about, but it's starting to look at a preventive model and to educate more about what that can be. What's starting to get more interesting in the later papers, so if we can switch to the next one, we're still kind of seeing the definition is old. So this is 2025, less than a year ago. And we're saying that this definition is outdated, two decades ago, and we should start to think about it in a different way. And even better, we have the next finding that I have that talks about exactly what you were mentioning, André. You feel, there's a self-shame that, maybe I'm not learning as fast, I'm not as smart, right? So there's many studies here that we can see that there is no difference in IQ levels from people with or without dyslexia. So we can quote Tanaka et al., 2011, and studies in the 90s and early 2000. Many studies show that, that there is no difference between children with dyslexia and typically achieving children on the general achievement score. Of course, there is some differences in the reading and the writing, right? So I found a book that was also interesting. So the next one is kind of a neuro-affirming book that talks about dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, and dyscalculia. So dyscalculia is the equivalent of dyslexia, but for math. So difficulty with numbers. Dyslexia is with language. And it's just called That's the Way I Think, right? That's the Way I Think. It's 2017, and it's a personal account it mentions that 1 out of 20 people might have dyslexia, so 5%. And it really tries to give a fuller understanding of the sensory experience and thoughts of individual with, and then the language changed to specific learning differences, right? So going from the deficit disorder model, now we're starting to say, hey, it's different way that we learn, the brain is different. And we'd love to hear more about, what type of different sensory experiences and thoughts can you share, Andrée, about your beautiful brain?
I suppose if we go to the dyslexia, I think the way I can kind of see things, and I think it does tie into the ADHD as well, but I can see the whole picture, the bigger picture. And I actually do think in pictures rather than words, which is something that I learned along the way. And then when it comes to reading things, that can be a little bit more, I suppose, it overloads my brain a little bit. So if I listen to things, I seem to absorb things a lot better. So I've learned that over the years, listen, see pictures, and then I can really, really understand what I'm talking about and thinking about. I think in terms of the dyspraxia, I'm still learning a lot about that, I'll be really honest, and I've been really looking at different areas of learning a bit more on it. But the ADHD, I think I do see, what would you say? It's kind of this imagination, this creativity. I can really see things in vivid colors, and I almost feel like 360-degree angles. And I do think it brings a lot to how I perceive things and understand things. And I do think as well that it also, I don't know what it is, but you have also a very empathetic and compassionate side. I don't know if that ties into the whole visual thing. But yeah, they're very strong, I think. What's the word I'm looking for? Very strong parts of my traits that I feel that I bring, into my work every day when I speak to clients.
Well, thanks, Andrée. That's a very compelling example, and understanding that exactly what we're talking about. It's learning, seeing, perceiving, showing up differently with a simply different brain that doesn't have to be demonized or told that it's not good enough, just to say it's different and let's try to figure out, the way you were describing it. I'm a poet and a writer. It sounded great. I would love to have that brain to see things in images and beautiful pictures. So that's great. So this book as well is very useful for parents and partners, teachers. Our digital wellness is working with schools and parents and institution. We care a lot about the youth. And so if you want to help people that might have a different brain, which is actually everyone, please take the time to read up on it, to reach out to Andrée in the UK or to us at AW, and to help prepare, prevent, and talk about it in the right way so that people don't get left behind, right? The next study, we talked about dyslexia as something potentially not lowering the IQ, just a different way of learning. And then there's also something called the twice exceptionality. So that is someone that is in the giftedness spectrum, so that is high IQ, and that also has dyslexia. And there is specifically the term GD, or gifted in dyslexia, but in general, it's called double or twice exceptionality. And this abstract, this is a research article in 2024 that talks about a more nuanced approach, right, for students, right? So it's really to say every brain is different, and some actually have a big potential. They might have higher IQ, higher ability to compute or to retain information than others, and it's masked with the dyslexic brain or trait, right? And it really talks about further research and looking at students whose potential may be masked, right? So this is underestimated in the school setting, in the household setting, and sometimes in the work setting. So we really want to talk about this as something that might have a potential if we talk about it, if we understand it, if we accommodate, if we think differently about these things and give opportunities to maybe learn differently, maybe learn with images, with audio. So thanks for sharing that. And then there is another book, I believe, that I want to reference, Twice Exceptional Teens, right? So specifically for adolescents. This is, again, rather recent, 2025. And the question is twice exceptional learners, what are we talking about in terms of language and in terms of awareness, right? So this book really challenges the traditional deficit and label-based approach, right? So if you want to pick up this book by Eleanor Van Derven, that could be one of those ways. If you want, workshop or coaching, please reach out to us. And I had last scientific reference. No, it's another book. Sorry. So it's a book by Rhonda Filmer, and it's putting it all together for twice exceptional students in the classroom. So again, if you're educators, and the abstract talks about school principals and professional learning leaders, if you're taking care of youth, if you're a parent, you already have 1 or 6, depending. But if you have hundreds or thousands of youth that you're taking care of, you should really educate yourself on that, and you should really educate your staff with proper training so that you have not only better academic grades, but also happier, well-balanced, and more accepted child and adolescent classroom. And it's really important for teachers and schools to understand all those different types of ways of learning. So that's it for my research. And, let's hear from you, Andrée. What do you think about what I found? Is it relevant? Are you seeing that in the schools, with children, with teens, with parents?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. I do feel that, and this is my personal perception, education is still catching up with dyslexia in particular. And I think it is good for teachers or people in that environment to start learning and understanding how people with dyslexia, how words are coming out. I'm having an ADHD moment. How they actually learn, how they take in information, how it works in the brain. It's like taking it in through the eyes, going to the brain, listening, taking that, processing that information and putting it back out. And here in the UK, I think it's only like 1/4 of a day that teachers are taught for neurodivergent conditions. So it's very, very hard because there's a lot more children now presenting with different neurodivergent traits, and the education for the poor teachers aren't there, and they're trying to manage this. And I do know teachers personally, and I've had the conversation, so I do know this is correct information. And it's, some of these teachers have come from being, they call them SEN teachers here, special educational need teachers. So some of them have that, I suppose, capability, they understand it, but some teachers who are going in new, I think it must be quite challenging for them because so many more children have different neurodivergent conditions. How are you going to enable those teachers or those students to be able to move forward, whether it's primary school or it's secondary school? And I think in secondary school, from, I think clients that have come to me, it can become a little bit more difficult. You might have managed in the lower grade schools, the primary school, but when you go to the bigger schools, there's a lot more, subjects, there's a lot more information. And even if you have sensory issues, you go to a bigger school, there's a lot more people, a lot more noise. those things have to be, I think, taken into consideration as well. But I really like those studies. There's a lot of information there that can be used.
Thanks, Andrée. And this sensory issue is something that's been also documented in neurodiversity in general, also in the giftedness spectrum. There is a very interesting theory of by the researcher Dabrowski that talks about overexcitabilities. So people can have emotional, intellectual, motor, or sensory overexcitability is called, right? So as you mentioned, you might go to a bigger school. It might be from grade school to middle school or high school or secondary in the UK and Canada, and then might go to college or university and it becomes overwhelming. So there's the sensory aspect. There could also be the emotional aspect, as you mentioned, being more empathetic or feeling more emotions. That's also part of the different brain, right? So it's not just about one thing, dyslexia. It's not about a grade. It's about how someone actually perceived and feels in the world differently.
Definitely. I think a lot of the time people aren't aware of the sensory issues. I mean, we can relate to this, Mark. Just before we started this, my computer was making a humming noise. And I know myself, background noise can be really irritating, or if something is too loud, oh, my ears just really can't cope. And I know I've worked with a client who's in theatre, and if there's any noise anywhere, that client just says, "What is that noise?" She said it could be like way on the other side of the theatre, but she can hear it. So those sensory issues bring a lot into not just, you managing your neurodivergent condition, but also managing yourself. And it can lead to a lot of overwhelm. And for some people it can be like sensory on the skin if they're wearing a uniform for a student, and it's rubbing, it's itching. It's just really irritating for that person. It could be smell, it could be something visual as well. I think with dyslexic people, sometimes that white screen or a white page can be overstimulating on our eyes. So it's just, being aware of that. One, if you have the condition, but if you're a teacher or somebody in a workplace environment, it's good for you to know that as well.
I guess unironically, right, when you were talking about that, I got like a notification sound from LinkedIn, and then all of a sudden my tension just lifted, and so it was like, what a coincidence that you're explaining that exact moment in the conversation, and then it just happened to me. So yeah, thanks so much for explaining that. And I think, people listening to this, they'll certainly have heard of ADHD, and it's quite ubiquitously used nowadays. Could you just take a moment, perhaps for some people who have never had it really properly explained to them, not necessarily the textbook framing, but what's actually happening, in how the ADHD brain is wired, right? And like you mentioned a little bit about the strengths, but a little bit more about this neurodivergent wiring that's going, what really differentiates it.
Okay, I suppose for a lot of people, and I explained it earlier myself, you have this idea of a hyperactive little child when you think of ADHD. And it's not quite that completely, although the first people to be actually diagnosed were boys. And up to the 80s, they thought it was mainly boys had ADHD. Obviously, it's called attention deficit, which is something that I think kind of isn't quite correct, because we can have a lot of attention on the right things, the things that we're really passionate about. And it's not quite a deficit or a disorder, I personally think. There's a gentleman called Edward Hallowell in the US, and he talks about calling it VAST, variable attention. Oh my God, I'm going to have a moment where I've forgotten what the S is. Traits. Attention sustainability trait, I think. So it's basically, it's a our attention is variable. It doesn't always, with our dopamine, it can be harder to concentrate on things for long periods. And it is a trait, it's not a disorder, I think. And it's all about that dopamine in our brain. It's not that we're lacking it, it's the reuptake of the dopamine in the brain. So it kind of, we have a bit and then it kind of leaves. So our attention span can almost be a little bit shorter, and we need that urgency for our attention, the interest. I can't think of the third one, my brain has gone dead, but there's like three things we really need for ADHD. And it's, if we're not having enough, if we're using our dopamine too much as well, that can be also an issue, which we will talk about later, like scrolling on your phone, things like that, which obviously just does wear down that dopamine.
Well, thanks, Andrée. Just wanted to say I was in a neuroscience conference 2 days ago, which we had 2 talks, and we talked about dopamine in the reward system, and also dopamine in the motor system, and very variable threshold, very complicated system, right? So there is many areas of the brain using dopamine, and maybe there's a link, if there's researchers out there that want to look if there's a link in the dopamine system that might be linked to dyslexia and dyspraxia, because dyspraxia is motor, right? So yeah, dopamine, you mentioned the reuptake. There's also different types of receptors, so D1 and D2 dopamine receptors. Dopamine doesn't cause the action potential of a cell. So dopamine doesn't actually make your neurons fire, but it influences the firing indirectly. And then there is some projections of dopamine or dopaminergic neurons that goes from different areas of the brain, including the basal ganglia, the ventral tegmental area. So it's a very complex system, and we know that brains are different. The permeability of dopamine receptors, the reuptake, as you mentioned. So, and that also changes slightly with time and with practices like meditation. If you want to try our digital reset, we have actually, especially for neurodivergent people, but also for everyone, to try to calm your brain, to focus your attention, right? And I think that, what you mentioned, and I'll be happy to look it up because that's very interesting. The vast variable attention, as you mentioned, everyone has variable attention, and we're losing more attention with the social media and other technology. But it is exactly what you mean from our research also. ADHD or ADD brains or ADHDers can have very good attention with things that are passionate, right? That they're passionate about, that they can be purposeful and focused. And actually, that's part also of my 8 P's, pillars of happiness, right? So there's passion and purpose that will make you happier, more productive, to find things and try to spend more time doing things that you have passion for, and you will find that attention. So thanks for sharing that, Andrée.
Really like that sound of that 8 pillars, the passion and purpose.
I found, Christian, what you just said really interesting about dopamine influencing the direction of neuronal firing, because almost at a behavioral level, it does explain the problem that I would think a lot of neurodivergent and people with ADHD do have, which is just starting, going from 0 to 1, the action potential that is required. But once an activity becomes fun, i.e. starts releasing dopamine, then it becomes a question of how do we stop this person from really engaging with this. But I think a lot of people perhaps do struggle to even find the motivation to get started in the first place because they don't feel any tangible reward from that activity in itself. So I found that that comment very interesting. I do have I guess an ADHD, well, a thought that just came up while you were talking, Andrée. So I do work with a lot of clients who have ADHD, and a lot of them do struggle with things that are quite typical, like focus and motivation. And I often see people with ADHD, they fall into one of two categories. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on like why this might be. One, I see a lot of people become very, very frustrated, and it's very difficult to see that they struggle a lot with the ADHD and they feel very held back because of it. And then there's people who have been diagnosed who have somehow tapped into this, I hate the term superpower, but they've found a way to really take advantage of their ADHD and they thrive with it. What do you think differentiates falling into one of these two categories? And I'm sure there's more than just two categories, but in my experience, I've typically seen people with ADHD, sorry, people with ADHD do fall into one of these two categories. What is the deciding factor here that constitutes this difference?
That's quite a tough one actually, because I think the frustration comes with not being able to kind of deal with various things that come up for you, like, you know, as you said, the planning, the organization, it's task initiation, and the verbal and non-verbal, I think, can be quite difficult. The working memory, verbal and non-verbal working memory. I see people who are later diagnosed, I have personally seen them being more frustrated than people who are a bit younger being diagnosed. That is how I've seen it. It may not be your experience, Mark, but I feel they're frustrated because they wanted to know earlier so they could do more, you know, with their ADHD. They would have been able to maybe choose better life choices, better jobs, better, for them they're saying better, just better choices in general in their life. But the frustration, I think, comes up when you're just not sure what's going on. You know, when I always say to people, let's unpack the suitcase and have a look at what's going on. You know, where are the areas you're struggling? And for some people, it's sometimes a job, and the job possibly is not correct for them. But that's obviously there. I'm not there as a coach to tell them that, but it's up for them to then make a decision. But I do think if somebody with ADHD is in the right job, I think they thrive. Over here, I know there's been a lot of research on people with ADHD in the police, you know, doctors, nurses, even the army. I personally believe there's probably a lot of people in the airlines as well, because none of those jobs are the same every day. They're quite different, they're quite challenging. And I find that people with ADHD very much jump into, say, let's danger. They don't kind of see that. So yeah, I wonder, is the frustration coming from, you know, not being in the right job, not feeling that this is the right way forward for you? I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Mark.
Well, I think that's certainly a factor, is being in the wrong environment that's perhaps not bringing out those qualities and skills of the person. And the second thing is perhaps just a passive acceptance that this is the way life is and there's nothing that can be done about this. And that leads to, I would say, often cases, just a type of depression, right? A feeling of helplessness that nothing can be done, and a fear of taking a leap into something uncertain, right? Going to a different job, different career path, moving to a new city, starting a new life with a new partner, perhaps even, right? A lot of people are afraid of taking that leap, and the ADHD, you know, only exacerbates the problem, I would say. And it might be, as you're talking, right, I started thinking that the people that we hear about saying ADHD is their superpower, who are hyper successful with it, and perhaps just discovered early on the environment, the right condition that brings out the strengths of having that ADHD, right? And if for anybody who's listening who has either been diagnosed or believes that they have ADHD and you're struggling, first, you know, it's good to see help. Perhaps, you know, reach out to Andrée or Christian or me, but also question your environment critically. You ask yourself, what decisions am I making today, or am I holding myself in a state out of fear of uncertainty, in a state that is making me struggle and have difficulty focusing and getting frustrated and repeating the same pattern day in and day out. Because I think that's the reality for a lot of people out there. A lot of people with ADHD is that they just passively accept this condition and they operate at suboptimal efficiency for the rest of their life.
Yeah, definitely agree with that.
Christian is muted. We'll see if Christian comes on. Still muted, but it's part of the podcast. So I think another question that did come to mind, and again, it perhaps relates to my practice for having worked with people with ADHD before, but if somebody is feeling frustrated, with their job or the lack of dopamine that they get in their environment, what are some practical things that they can do to just discover perhaps something that is better suited for them?
I do think if you're not enjoying something, it's definitely worth investigating why, whether it's the job. Are you getting any dopamine from your job? That's always a good one to look at. And if so, where are you getting the dopamine in the job?
Right.
And I always find as well, because obviously our sleep rhythm is a bit out of whack. The people sometimes that have to get up early can really struggle with that, because the brain isn't quite waking up until about 12 midday, maybe a little bit earlier, with the cortisol only coming up around that time. So sometimes I think if you're not able to get up early and not able to do a job earlier in the day, is that the right job for you?
Right.
I also look at what brings you dopamine, what really interests you, what are the things you love doing, and are you doing this within your life, within your job? I think they're really good things to know for somebody with ADHD when they're not getting that, I suppose, reward or the interest. It's very, very hard for them then to start and do that.
Yeah, I think as to what we discussed before, critically examine where do I get, if I take away all the artificial cheap sources of dopamine rewards in my life, where do the natural rewards come from? Giving a hug to a loved one, or engaging in some really creative activity. I really like, filmmaking, for example. And I mean, making small movies, and that process is really fulfilling for me. And it's a different type of reward than just watching a video on YouTube or doom scrolling. And I think people need to critically examine where do they get their rewards from in life, because I think it's never been easier to become stimulated by the endless source of information that there is out there in the ecosystem and on the internet nowadays. And for somebody with ADHD, that it can be a disastrous situation. Do you see any correlation between the preponderance of online media, remote jobs, just the internet ecosystem, and the rise of ADHD symptoms in today's world?
I definitely think having a lot more tech is definitely not helping people with ADHD.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if it's bringing on more. I think people are becoming more aware of what ADHD is. That's why there's more diagnosis, I think. But I do think if you consider a lot of people, like we're on a call here, a lot of meetings from, as you've said, hybrid working or working from at home, people are on Zoom meetings, back-to-back Zoom meetings. it's so tiring on the brain, and you're trying to concentrate, you're trying to look at somebody in the eyes, you know, there's all these different factors. And then if you think in the meantime, you're getting constant notifications on your phone, WhatsApp,
Right.
Facebook, you know, and these are kind of, yeah, I always think of the prefrontal cortex with the executive functioning as like it's filling up a bucket of water.
Right.
And there's only so much the brain can hold until it then overflows. And because our emotional regulation part of our brain is in the prefrontal cortex, it's normally the thing that kind of gives a bit, and we can get very overwhelmed, we can get upset. There can be RSD, the rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So that part of the brain can automatically go into the, I always call it the safety part of the brain. It's the limbic brain, that you know, older part of the brain that's trying to protect you. And you know, there can be emotional dysregulation where you end up crying. You know, maybe the body has a bit of, the nervous system kind of goes, so the heart rate's up, the tummy's going. You know, there's a lot that can come when we, I think, overload that prefrontal cortex, the executive functioning part of it.
Yeah. It's true that it's the part that helps with the emotional regulation, and again, we can train that with some meditation, focus activities, other coaching techniques, or audio guide that we're trying to do as well here at AW. Can you explain what you mentioned about the dysphoria? Can you define that for me and the audience? I know what dysphoria is, but not this particular one.
So it's an actual rejection or a perceived rejection, and it's, I suppose, giving examples of it. It might be if your boss is giving you feedback and you're thinking, he's thinking, I'm not good enough, I've worked really hard on this, and the amount of emotion that can come with that. It can even be from a loved one, but it can be an explosion. It can be like a volcano where you just get so angry and it comes out so quickly you don't know what's happened. Or it can be the opposite. You can internalize it and feel very almost wounded by it. It's when it says sensitivity, it's very much almost that nervous system being so sensitive to what the person is saying to them. And it might even be a look. It might not be verbalized. It might be a look, or even somebody turning their body in a certain way. You read the cues with the rejection sensitivity. So although there might not be anything wrong, you're perceiving it as it could be something wrong. And it's like an impact, a punch, some people say, in the stomach.
Thanks, Andrée. And you know, what can we do to help people that feel that? Is there any techniques, tricks, ideas that might help? I mean, of course, there's CBT, and there's, you know, catastrophizing thoughts and all that cognitive work. But as we mentioned, perhaps the cognition, which is the prefrontal cortex or executive network, is not really working at that time. So do you have any ideas? And Mark as well, do you have any ideas of what we can do?
You want to go first?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll let Andrée go first.
Okay. I suppose I've worked with a client in the last few days who's had they've really felt this has been a big part of their life. So we looked at it in different contexts. So I looked at it at work, I looked at it in relationships and with friends, and at work they said they could normally see it coming, but they didn't address it. So there were steps to it happening, and then the explosion, and then the person left the job. They just said, I quit and left. And we've spoken about how they could have mitigated that, you know, those circumstances, how they could have stopped it before it actually happened. They said in the relationships, they weren't always aware it was coming. It could be very big, it could be very emotional. So what I always recommend to people, if that happens, just say to the person, look, I am really sorry, but I need to go away and process this for a few minutes. I will be back. And then at least you give yourself time to kind of regulate, take a few breaths, think about really what has happened, and then come back and have a calmer conversation. Because when you're in the whole emotional state, it can actually get worse, it can turn into a bigger argument, and that's where a lot of people, I think they find shame as well in it. It's, where did this come from? I don't understand why I got so angry. So it's taking the shame out of it and coming back and having a conversation later with the person. I don't know about you, Mark, you might have better
Yeah, I
ones.
think that's a really good strategy, is that you are basically creating a buffer between like the stimulus and the reaction. And so before the emotions really take over, you excuse yourself and you go somewhere where you can perhaps reflect, meditate, basically calm your nervous system down a little bit. I think that's a very effective strategy, and I was almost going to suggest a variation of what you said, to basically prepare, if you've seen this pattern before, that you have some really uncomfortable feelings arise that the moment somebody seemingly criticizes you, or you feel rejected, that you anticipate this response in a way where you can recognize at the moment it starts arising and really use that as an opportunity to practice some sort of mindful response. That's what my recommendation would have been.
Sorry, one other technique that can work, is probably better in relationships, but you name your RSD. So if it does happen,
Yeah.
so take yourself away, do your meditation, your breathing, come back. And mine's called the duck, because apparently when I get angry, my lips tend to come out a bit. So I can come back and say, look, the duck came out. I'm sorry. And then you can sit down and explain why it happened. But it brings a bit of humor into it. It breaks the ice. You can laugh about it. So
Right.
there are various ways, and it depends what works for you.
Yeah, I also try to tell my clients to use humor and to kind of diffuse situation and have, patterns like that. Like, now with your partner or your relationship or whoever, that when you say the duck it's because I realize, I'm aware, right? And as some of the listeners may know, awe is an emotion, and also our company, but awe also stands for awareness, wellness, and enjoyment. So enjoyment is the laughter and the joke, but the first part is awareness. And you both mentioned that if someone is starting to develop an awareness of, this is something that I really don't want, I don't know how to control, I did this, I felt this, the first step is always awareness, right? So once you have the first awareness, then you can cultivate that awareness, and then you can respond better, and you can prevent it as well, because you're seeing the awareness. You can maybe have other tools to not go to that level that you don't want to go. And go ahead, Andrée.
Sorry, I'm just going to have a drink of water. I think awareness.
To talk about, again, the very beautiful discussion that we're having is all of us admitting we're neurodivergent, all of us being able to say, hey, we think differently. Everyone does, but maybe differently than what you're expecting. We learn differently, we interact differently, we feel differently, we talked about, right? What have you been able to do in for yourself and the people that you help, in letting them actually not have the stigma and communicate that, right? So, hey, I think like this, I feel this strongly, I think I learn a bit differently. Is it helpful in relationships? Is it helpful at work and at school to be able to name it, to explain it, to kind of not excuse yourself, but just to communicate, right?
I find, okay, so if we go to the work environment, it depends where you work. If you feel safe enough to do that, because safety has to be important there. If it is a company that is very pro knowing about neurodiversity and helping, I think then you can advocate for yourself very well. A lot of people, a lot of clients I find, don't want to disclose their neurodivergent traits because they've been in situations where they've done that in the past and it just hasn't worked out well for them. So what we do instead is, I say, you can still advocate for yourself. You don't have to disclose your neurodivergence. So say, if you're dyslexic, say, I would really value having some bullet points before we go into a meeting so I know what's going on. With the ADHD, that works quite well too. You could say, there's a little bit of noise in the office. Do you mind if I put on my headphones or I face a different way? All those things I think are valuable, and you don't have to disclose if you don't feel comfortable. I think, however, in relationships, it is valuable if your partner is understanding as well, and if you can explain why you may react in certain ways. Like for women and their hormones on a monthly basis, it can be times where you're just a bit more, I suppose you're tired, the emotions are a little higher. So it's good for your partner to know that. So if you do feel a little bit tired or you explode one day, they'll know, you can explain it to them. And I think it's good for them to understand maybe why there's certain days you feel like you can't clean the house because, you're just tired, you're a bit more drained. I think all these things are very valuable in relationships, so the other person can understand you and you're also not feeling that sensitivity, the rejection sensitivity thing come up as well. So I don't know what your experiences are.
Thanks for sharing, and I think it's very relevant that we are able to have those discussions, and also thank you everyone for joining live. If you do have some comments or question, feel free to put them in the chat at any time. We'll try to get through them. So these types of podcasts are there to kind of help people understand and perhaps gain the confidence to be able to even share that in the workplace. As you mentioned, it doesn't have to be I'm asking this because I have this diagnosis. It's more like I prefer to do this that way. I really like that approach, right? And as you mentioned, relationship, very important to kind of communicate your brain state, your hormonal state, as we talked about. And then, tell me a bit what you see at schools and how can we communicate, because you mentioned that your diagnosis was helpful for some accommodation. Hey, I'm taking it in French. I think I have a dyslexic brain today. So we're doing live embodiment of those ideas. So yeah, tell me a bit what do you think in the school system, younger school age groups and higher, how is the disclosing, and what are the best practices that you see, and we can talk about and encourage people?
I do think, again, it depends on the school and on the area. Here in the UK, different counties get funding. I find that some areas are better funded than other areas, so they're very approachable, they will help the child, and other areas then don't have the funding, so it's almost not part of what they do in the school system. But I do think it's always good to go to the teacher and explain, so that the teacher is aware. I have a friend in primary and a different friend in secondary school who are teachers, and they say you can normally see, especially with the dyslexia, quite quickly, especially in younger children. They'll see that maybe, reading, that they're skipping the lines, or they're actually just struggling to kind of word out the letters, produce it into a word. So I think it's good for the teachers to know, although they are quite aware, but here in the UK, because there's so many children coming forward as well, teachers are starting, I think, to get a bit overwhelmed by the amount of students that have different neurodivergent traits. And I suppose it's not for me to say, but it would be, in an ideal world, it would be good for all teachers to have some really valuable training on the different neurodivergent traits, so that children can move forward with confidence in their life and understand themselves and be able to advocate for themselves in the workplace.
Well, thank you so much, Andrée. That is exactly what we're doing at AWE, is trying to give more resources, more not just one-off workshop, but support, right? So give information, but also, okay, I've learned this 6 weeks ago, but now I have a new case, a new student, something's happening. What should I do, right? So we're trying to give a complete support to schools so that they don't feel overwhelmed. Like you said, the teachers are overwhelmed, the schools are overwhelmed. They don't really understand all the subtleties, the nuance that we talked about, right? And so that's our mission, to really help that. And thanks for sharing what you're seeing in the UK and your thoughts. We believe in an ideal world. We know that it's not going to happen by sitting around and clapping our fingers. It's by doing things every day and making as much an impact as we can. So we're really on that same page, Andrée. We had a comment from one of your fans that said, enjoyed seeing you. Um,
I
so
saw something flash on the screen.
yeah,
I thought, I'm not going to look.
so
There we
it's
go.
Nova Raptor saying it was nice hearing from you. Andrée would definitely love to see you on the podcast again. So if you have other questions or comment, as you know, our podcast is normally 60 to 90 minutes. Sometimes, if we're busy, it's a bit less than 60 minutes, but we have such a beautiful guest and topic that we're probably going to be here another half an hour. So if you're live, you can stay around and ask more questions and have more comments. If you're looking or hearing this later, you'll get bonus footage. So let's continue on the topic. We have still quite a few things that we haven't talked about, Andrée. And the next one on the list for me is we talked about, late diagnosis. Tell me a bit about late diagnosis and also the difference perhaps between man, woman, or girl, boy, in kind of the discovery of some of those symptoms. I know, for instance, in my research, I found that perhaps that the boys are exhibiting those traits more as an external, and that woman, female brain, more like internal experience of those same similarly affected in a beautiful way brains. So tell me about live experience, what you know, what you've learned.
I'm going to just start off with one thing. This is the ADHD brain going off on a tangent, but I mean, ADHD is around since 1798, and it was called, I think, attention deficit back then. So it has been called some terrible names in between, but it's been mainly diagnosed on men and boys all that time. So fast forward to the 1980s, and it's renamed, and still boys getting diagnosed, and some girls. Fast forward here to the UK, have you any idea when our national health system first kind of recognised ADHD in adults? Have a guess. 2008. So 2008, wow. It's not even 20 years old here. So, okay, so that's that. So we now know adults can have it, but it's presenting more in men again. I mean, women are being diagnosed with it, but all of a sudden, I think around 2015-16, there was a lot of, I think, studies done on hormones in women with ADHD, and then how that was showing up differently in women. But if we also go back to, I'm kind of flick-flacking here, so sorry everyone, it's my ADHD brain flick-flacking around. But if we go back to girls of my generation, I'm in my 50s now, I never heard of ADHD. I mean, I grew up in Ireland. Maybe you heard of it on TV as a teenager, but you didn't know what it was. And as a girl, you were always told, sit down, be good, behave, don't do that, behave this way. So you end up overcompensating as a female, and you kind of mask then to kind of fit in. And so your whole life you're going, well, I should be doing this and I should be doing that. So that mask is on most of your life. Then when some women might see traits of it after they've had a baby, so postpartum, and the first sign there could be that they get postnatal depression because their estrogen is so low. So then you move on to perimenopause and menopause, and for women, what I normally see, and I can actually relate to this myself, your systems fall apart. So you've managed everything, just about managed. You're thinking some women have kids, career, and they have 100 and other things going on, and they're trying to manage this. And suddenly, with the lack again of estrogen in the body that helps you produce your dopamine, they just can't concentrate. The brain fog is exceptionally heavy. Things that worked the way they planned and organized before, it just doesn't happen for them because of the lack of dopamine. So I think that's how it differentiates, I think, from women to men. There's a lot of masking for women, so it just goes unrecognized until there's really bad hormonal issues, probably the perimenopause for a lot of women. So I suppose I'm very passionate about this, having been one of those women, and understanding that I had a lot of burnout before it happened, and then it got worse when I went into perimenopause. So I think that's very good for women to understand as well. If you're burning out a lot, why are you burning out a lot? Is it taking you a long time to come out of that burnout? Because the way somebody with ADHD recuperates from burnout is very different to someone who's neurotypical. So it's worth knowing those things.
Thanks, Andrée. Oh, as we're extending, we have a question.
Nova Raptor says, "Oh, I didn't realize I have a question then. I was wondering how you stay focused when you always feel burned out from everyday tasks, but you know you have to get things done." Thanks, Nova Raptor.
Great question.
Andrée, do you have a response to this? How do you avoid burnout from everyday tasks?
I've had to learn the hard way, Nova Raptor. I have burnt out a lot over the years, and what I've noticed is patterns for me. Before the burnout reaches its bad state, I'll find I'm getting very tired. I'm oversleeping. I know some people with ADHD don't sleep very well. I'm not eating very well. I've no interest in anything. I don't want to go and do the things I love doing, like my exercise. I'm trying to eat well, but I'm wanting to eat a lot of sugary or high carb foods. So I think look at the signs that are leading up to your burnout, and take breaks. I'm very big on taking breaks, because you can stay in front of a computer hyper focusing for hours, or just trying to get through what you're doing. If you're not giving your brain the time to relax, to kind of regulate, and your nervous system to regulate as well, it's kind of just encouraging that burnout to come on sooner. So I do think the breathing, as we've spoken about, Mark, meditation is very important. But that doesn't, even for us with ADHD, some people go, "Oh, I can't sit there and meditate. I can't sit there and breathe." Go outside, have a look at the birds on the trees, go for a walk down the road, look at the flowers. That's meditation in itself. It's just looking at the sensory aspects outside, getting that vitamin D from, the sunlight. And we don't get a lot of it here in the UK, but it's still there. And that's really important as well for our mental well-being. And I think it's also, if I'm correct, it helps build some of our dopamine as well, but I could be incorrect in that.
Yeah, I can answer on that, but beautiful response, Andrée. Yes, and I've been enough time in the UK. The sun is rare, but when it's there, stop everything and go in the sun, basically. Yes. But just earlier this morning, I went outside to get some sun and really felt kind of the sunlight. And yes, it does a lot of good things for attention, for the brain. But in general, so you mentioned a few things that I can, give a bit more context in terms of neuroscience and the studies. So one is definitely nature in general. There's some study that it's called actually the theory of attention restoration. So nature restore your attention, and we talked about variable attention, VAST. I will not use ADHD anymore, Andrée. Thank you. VAST is the new term. So to help that variable attention, nature has been consistently showing that it restores your attention. So go for a walk. We have one team member in a marketing team that just started last week to go for a walk every afternoon. I love walks. So please, if you're able, and it's not raining, or take an umbrella if you're in the UK, and go for a walk anyways. That's definitely helpful. Because you mentioned breaks, right? So your brain needs a break, and the best breaks are either nature. The other one is social. So if you have someone that doesn't annoy you and doesn't, not gonna put your emotion too high, go have a joke with them, and social will also give you back that energy so you're not burnt out. One of the signs of corporate burnout actually is when you start to feel that you don't enjoy spending time with your coworkers, or that you're right. So, to prevent that, make sure that you're having good quality time with your coworkers, with your family, with your friends. And lastly, you mentioned, meditation. And the most important part, you mentioned that people don't like meditation, they don't have the time, right? And that's why we created the digital reset. Mark and I are doing some of them, and we're quite direct, and we sometimes say that meditation is BS. And we're just, using it in a way to say, like, we know how you struggle, we know how your brain thinks, and we're not here to waste your time to, give you some meditation you can find on YouTube or on other apps. It's really very specific science-based nervous system reset, and also positive psychology. So we talked about Artemis in the last reset, and oneness and awe, and giving you that we talk about nature and social connections. So to give you all those recipe in audio that is more entertaining than normal meditation. So we understand you and your patients.
So
Mark?
important, and the meditation in itself, that it's people, I think what it is with ADHD, it's that people think they have to sit there and switch off their thoughts. You
No,
don't
some of the
have to.
meditation we
Yeah.
suggest that you walk, actually. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You don't have to. So
you don't
that's
have to
where the
sit still.
perception
No.
is incorrect. So yeah, sounds really, really good. I'll have to have a listen.
Mark, any other thoughts on the burnout question?
Well, what I found like works really well for me, on top of the dieting and sleep things, which are just essential. Um, I need a really intense like cardiovascular workout, like where I'm just really tired afterwards, but like really hard cardio training and sauna afterwards. So my gym has a sauna. Sauna helps me a lot, helps me relax me a lot, and I just switch off. I tried meditating in the sauna the other day, and it's actually very interesting because a lot of times there's when you're in the sauna, everything in you is saying like, get out of here, it's uncomfortable, I don't like this. Similarly, when you're sitting at a desk doing something you don't like, everything in you is trying to escape the discomfort of having to do the task. So for me, the sauna represents like it's a physical representation of that, and it's a test to see how long can I stay with this discomfort. And I push myself, and then I allow myself to go, and I'm feel like I get more discipline over my mind just in this physical state doing that. So that's my recommendation.
It's almost gamifying it for yourself, isn't it? Kind of, I'm going to try
I
and see
have
how
to.
long.
You have to gamify it. You have to in a video game. That's what makes it fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I really like that.
Yeah, thanks for all those examples. And I used to live in a place that had a beautiful sauna with a view on the 15th floor. So I used to go there. But now I'm pretty much doing the cold exposure in terms of resilience and cold baths as well. So yeah, hot, cold, nature. And Mark, you want to read the follow-up question?
Yeah, I think Nova Raptor asked again, this sounds like me, how often should you take breaks? Good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would be, sorry, I've just lines here that are sending sunlight right through me. Sunlight in the UK. I think if you're sitting down and you're in an office room in front of a computer, I think you should be taking them hourly, at least hourly. Even half an hour. I think for ADHD brains, we work in shorter chunks. So I always talk about the Pomodoro, kind of technique where you sit down for 25 minutes and then you get up and move around for 5. it's taking that break. Or you could work for 20 minutes and give yourself a 10-minute break 1 hour and do 25 and take 5 minutes the next. I suppose it also depends on your job. How often are you able to step away from your desk? Does your job allow this? But I do think a lot of people don't take breaks during their lunchtime, stepping away from a computer. And I think that's invaluable for our brains. Not taking that break is pushing and pushing and pushing. I had a client recently, these are all real experiences. She went away for a weekend. She's a very stressful job. Went away for a weekend, very little tech, and she came back and she said, I can do things. I can't believe just having that break really helped me. She's not in front of a computer, but having that break and that weekend away really reset her brain, reset her body, her nervous system, and she felt ready to go. And she's actually pregnant, so it was a win-win for her. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Andrée. Very concrete examples, and the ADHD and other brains are very different. The Pomodoro technique is very popular. I also suggest people to try it and then modify it. Right. So there's another technique called the Flowmodoro technique, which is kind of variation, and it actually asks you to look at your own flow state, right? So you can have something that reminds you to take a break, but also you can say when you're taking the break, how much of that time that I wasn't taking a break was I focused in the flow, in the moment, in the passion of the ADHD brain. And if it's most of the time, then maybe it can go up to an hour if you're doing something with passion and focus, right? If you spent 20 minutes and 12 of them you were all distracted, then you should take a break shorter, right? So you can take notes and try to figure out at first when is the best time for you and your brain to take a break, and then it'll become intuitive where you'll know that, okay, now is the time to take a break. And I really like we're living in a fast-paced culture, and a lot of people are not taking lunch. So it's not just the food aspect, it's the break, and also the social aspect. Try to have lunch with someone that you can share and look in their eyes and not in your phone while you have lunch. That would be great.
A word that I use with clients is called halt. And if you're feeling a bit off, are you hungry? Are you angry? Are you lonely? Are you thirsty? And 9 times out of 10, it's bound to be one of them.
And again, it comes back to the concept of awareness, right?
Yeah.
Before you react, try to be aware of what's going on behind.
Definitely. And that can be with the emotional dysregulation as well.
Yes, I've heard of HALT, and then H can be for 2 things, hungry or horny.
I wasn't expecting that one.
Well, Christian can be naughty sometimes, so I'll go to the next question. So I think a lot of people, especially parents, will be really glad that we're having this conversation today. And there are a lot of parents that are concerned, confused, and perhaps unsure what to do about a child presenting ADHD symptoms, even if they get diagnosed. And there is a lot of pressure, I will say, since I'm American in the United States, to have the child perform already at a young age, and then that subsequently causes them to look for a solution that is quick and immediate, something like medications. And there is, I would say, a lot of trepidation from parents especially to prescribe medications to their children at such an early age. Now, I want to be clear, none of us are medical professionals. None of this is medical advice that we're constituting here. But do you have any thoughts on perhaps alternatives for parents if they have some concern or doubt about letting children be prescribed psychotropic medications at such an early age? For ADHD, that is, that specifically.
I think, I mean, you can always try and manage it holistically. Look at the diet, take out anything that has a lot of preservatives in it, low carb, low sugar, diet. When I say low carb, I mean the white, what am I looking for? My brain has gone dead. So it's like your cakes, your white breads, anything like that, white pasta. Change your diet over to like a more brown, grain-based diet. So your bread would be brown, your rice, your pasta. Just cutting back on the sugar a lot, because children with ADHD love sugar. It gives them that dopamine boost. So if they're eating a lot of that, it's also probably not going to help with their sleep patterns later at night, because they have too much sugar in their system. So I think the diet is a big one. Make sure they're drinking enough water every day. I also think exercise. Are they getting outside enough? Are they getting enough daylight for their brains to help it, activate? What was the other thing? I have worked with parents and children, and I've used the havening for both of them. So when the child starts to feel a bit dysregulated, it normally mirrors in a family. So if the child's dysregulated, the parent can become very dysregulated as well. So what I would ask the parents to do in that situation is leave the room, do a bit of havening for 5 minutes and come back in. Get the child to do a bit, get them to help the child do a bit of havening. And it did work. It worked quite well. I mean, it's a few years since I've done it, and I worked with quite a few children and parents. I'm just trying to think of anything else that I think might work. I mean, I used to do a breathing exercise which worked quite well with kids. It's like you draw a figure 8, and you breathe in on the upper part and you breathe out on the lower part, and you keep getting them to do that, make it into a flower. And by the time they're finished, they've kind of regulated, they can colour in the flower. It's something they enjoy normally doing, they're creative. So it's just a little technique to help the child, and the parent could do it with them as well. It's just the figure 8. Breathe in, breathe out.
I really love that, Andrée. I'm also, doing some research in education and in embodied learning, and really to have that ability to understand that different brains see and do things differently. And we talked about some of the misconception of meditation has to be seated down and boring, right? And just breath work, which we also know affects your nervous system and regulates you from your emotional state, right? So your parasympathetic or sympathetic and dorsal or ventral. So breathing techniques we're very proud of, but it's not just listen and breathe like you mentioned. It's like doing it while physically activating your visual and motor at the same time. So great job, Andrée. I love that technique, especially for children, but also for adults. So that's great. And by the way, you mentioned the interesting fact that ADHD for adults have been lately accepted that it's a thing, and even the early diagnosis. Same thing for giftedness, right? So giftedness research, first of all, has been defunded in most of the US and Canada. Europe is doing some of the best, in Netherlands specifically for giftedness research. So good if you're Dutch, keep doing that good research. And most of the research is for children. And of course the brain changed, but the traits of ADHD, dyslexia, giftedness, all the neurodiverse traits, normally it's genetic. So you're going to keep pretty much the same brain, but you can train it. So there is gifted adults. There are adult and late adult ADHD, right? So, and to have that discussion that, of course, the earlier we can talk about it in schools and with the kids, but also often what we hear as well is that the child gets gifted or ADHD diagnosed, and then the parent says, "Oh, well, I had that for X amount of years," right?
It's actually, I have a cousin at the moment, and her daughter was diagnosed a couple of years ago, and she just got diagnosed in the last year. She didn't see any of it in herself until she got her child diagnosed. So it's normally what happens. The child gets diagnosed, and the parent then goes, I did that my whole life, and they go for the diagnosis. And it is genetic. It's like about 80% genetic, isn't it, I think, from understanding.
Yes. And you touched on something before we get to the question. Creativity, right? Just wanted to also when we talked about some of the challenges, and by the way, um, challenges are good, right? So having challenges allow you to be resilient, creative, and learn. If you don't have an appropriate challenge, you're not learning. So when we talk about learning differently, those are opportunities to learn and to find the world in a different way with those challenges. Secondly, the ADHD brain, or vast brain, as we'll call it now, is definitely, having the ability to have a different default mode network system as well, so not just the executive control. And it is in general more creative, right? So one of the strengths, we talked about creativity, and that's part of my 7C frameworks of happiness. So creativity, curiosity, courage, and arguably, you guys can tell me, um, is curiosity part of something that you're seeing in your daily life? Because if you're seeking different attention, you're probably more curious than most, right? And curiosity didn't just kill the cat. Curiosity actually a tool for happiness and for a relationship. If you're curious about someone, you'll get deeper trust in a relationship. If you're curious about the world, you'll be happier and you'll learn more. So those are things that are maybe what Mark calls superpower. It's just a different way of living, but it's also a beautiful thing to notice and to share.
I think you have to be curious for sure.
Yeah. And I think it does come, I think with some of the neurodivergent traits, I think with all of them, I think there's probably a bit of curiosity in there, because we see things in a very different way. So we'll ask a lot of questions. I know I have a friend who has dyslexia and autism, and she'll ask the questions I never think of asking. And I go, wow, that's amazing. Why did I not think of that? But also I see people then with ADHD and dyslexia who like try out new things, different hobbies. They'll do things that some people go, "I God, I'd never do that," but they just go and do it and they enjoy it. So they try different things. There's a bit of adventure in there, I think. So that's a really strong aspect of being neurodivergent.
Thanks for sharing both. And do we want to answer the question or comment?
If I am autistic ADHD, all ADHD and dyslexic, do I get to take longer breaks? HM Clausy, thank you.
So someone's been listening to the podcast and got the humor note. So that's good.
You can try. See
Take
if
the
you get
breaks
away
that you
with
need,
it.
and come back with a smile and with some passion and purpose, and be kind to yourself, be compassionate to yourself and to others. Also understand that perhaps, like Andrée mentioned, perhaps people won't understand your brain, and you'll have to have feelings sometimes of isolation or not being understood, and that's part of it. Yet you have to know that you're not alone. That there's a lot of people with weird and fun brains, like all three of us, I guess. I don't know if mine is fun, but it's definitely weird. So, make sure to know that we can build communities, not only to say, oh, all the ADHD people come together, all the neurodiverse. It's not about, it's just everyone has a beautiful, different brain. And the more you're aware about that, then you can accept, okay, some people cannot understand the way I feel, the way I think, emotion we talked about, sensory. And that's okay. You don't have to please everyone, and you don't have to be understood by everyone either.
Advocate for yourself, when you want help. I also say it can be good to have a tribe. So, if you know a group in your area that are neurodivergent, it can be good to go along and meet other people, and you'll have the same experiences. But not everybody is into that, so it depends what you enjoy doing.
And again, the confidence and the ability to communicate to others and to yourself, and to really understand that differences are normal. Everyone is different, and they're not good or bad. It depends on what you do with them. Mark mentioned seeing clients with the same type of condition, the same type of issues or possibilities, and the way they choose to see them made a difference, right? So I'm a happiness expert. I write about positive psychology a lot. One of my 8 P's in the framework, not only passion and purpose, is positivity. And positivity is not false positivity, is not to lie to yourself. There is some science that also, the science of positivity, that shows that, for instance, people that believe that they'll get better after getting bad medical news, they actually, on average, get better, right? So it's not brain over matter or matter over brain. It's always a combination, but your brain can affect your physical and mental state, your happiness. And if you try to see something as defeating and negative, or a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset and a curiosity, creative mindset, you're doing yourself a disfavor. And all three of us have seen it, and we have the tools to help you. But first, be aware that you can probably be happier and better than you are today. And it's okay if you're not. There's just today and tomorrow, and we'll move forward with that.
Neuroplasticity, isn't it? Kind of.
Exactly.
For those who don't know, it's like, the brain is malleable. So, sometimes we can have, between the neurons, it can get a bit stuck. So it's kind of just building that pathway again, and, being a bit positive every day. Even if you every morning just got up and said, what are the 3 things that I'm most grateful for today? It could be the simplest thing, like I have hot water I can have a shower with, I have a bed I can lie in, I have food I can eat. It doesn't need to be anything, the big wow factor. It's just, what are you grateful for? And that can kind of just train the brain to actually see things in a much more positive way.
Oh, we're so into gratitude, and in my first book I talk about gratitude. Second book I talk about appreciation, and we have some tools as well that are to journal about this and to help you practice that as a practice on your own. There's not enough to be said about gratitude, and it is, our default brain is meant to be ungrateful. So it is something that you have to train to appreciate the good in everything. It doesn't come just like that every morning. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that, and hope you can help people again to see those little things. I've done some 100 days plus gratitude practice and appreciation, and now it's become a habit, but it did take a lot of time.
It's worth doing it. I think once you start it, it becomes more of it's building a habit, which I think with ADHD, once you start building a habit, it can kind of stay. So I think it's very good to have that daily practice. You could do it before you go to bed as well, if you feel.
And I also encourage people that want to start a gratitude or appreciation practice. Yes, we have resources, but it's not too complicated. The basic one, as Andrée said, is 3 things every day. There is some variation, it can be improved, but if you want to start small, 3 things every day, morning or night. And what people don't often talk about is try to get someone else to do it with you, right? A friend, a family member, your partner, your children, your coworker. Once you're accountable, not only do you succeed more and the habit change, but you get that extra social aspect of attention and of happiness that we need, right? So those are some of my suggestions. I've been doing and coaching a lot of people to be happier, and no one has complained yet. So, but there is the comment sections if you want to complain. So thanks everyone for the comments, by the way. A few comments from different people. Thanks for the engagement. I think that we're having a beautiful conversation. Any thoughts, that things we haven't covered, Marc and Andrée?
It's been such a pleasure speaking with you, and I've learned so much from this discussion. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from both of you as well. I really love the pillars, and I love your insights as well, having ADHD, Marc, because we'll both present differently, clearly, because we're a man and woman, but it's also, I think I always like talking to other people with neurodivergent conditions, because I think we bring a lot to the table. We come up with really different ideas and different strategies, and I do think when we come together, we create something really special and really different.
Thank you both. I really enjoyed the discussion. Also learned a lot. We talked about lived experience. We talked about statistics, neuroscience, psychology, real concrete solutions. Thank Andrée. I took note of some of them. I love the figure 8. That's beautiful. I will be using VAST going forward, and that's how we raise the awareness so that we all can do and be better. So I really appreciate. We have a tradition on the podcast for a little real talk section. So is there kind of a small personal story that you want to share to the audience before we leave? I know you've shared a lot already, but we'll leave it up to you to share.
Small personal story. I suppose in relation to my ADHD, because it's probably the one that's been there, I suppose, undiagnosed for so long. Yeah, okay. It's kind of a mix of my dyslexia and ADHD. I got married a couple of years ago, and the day after my wedding, it probably ties into the dyspraxia, thinking of it as well. The morning after my wedding, I couldn't find, the suit carrier for my wedding dress. So there was a family app, and I decided to send a text and said, can anybody find? And I was a bit tired. I hadn't gone to bed. I hadn't had much sleep. And suitcase was coming out in my head. So I put it in, and the first word didn't come out as suitcase. It came out as a completely different word, if you get my meaning. The whole family were like, what are you talking about, Andrée? And my niece, who was like 16 or 17, came back with a big laugh, smiley face. She's dyslexia as well. About, what the hell is a case? A bleep case. So that's a funny story, I suppose, in terms of the three of them mixed in. But I'm trying to think a story of my ADHD. If I'm really honest, I suppose when I look back, I think the emotional aspect, it really affected me in some of my relationships. Like the boyfriends I had, the RSD could come up really quickly, and maybe in those relationships I didn't feel safe either, and the names that were given to me. So when I was diagnosed and I kind of started understanding that part of it, I realized I wasn't all those names I'd been called in the past, and that actually there was a reason why it was happening to me. So if you're somebody and you're finding your emotions are coming up a lot, and maybe you don't know you have ADHD or you haven't looked into it, maybe it's something to look into. The emotional aspect was a very big part of knowing about my ADHD and how it contributed to a lot of arguments and relationships. So that's just one of the things out there that I think is really important for people to know.
Thanks so much for that funny story. I can imagine the laughter and slight shame, but again, switching it directly to, it's funny, I'll even talk about it on podcasts, I'll remember it later. It's part of what my brain is, right? So that's how we can encourage people to not be so self-critical and enjoy life. Just wanted to remember everyone, again, thanks for watching and listening to this beautiful discussion live or later. We will be releasing a few shorts as always, and watch for this also on your favorite audio podcasts. If you're preferring to reading, we talked about dyslexia. We're also on audio. You can use it during your nature walk. So we're on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and all your favorite podcasts, audio apps. And next week we're having another guest on Friday, April 24th. So please join us. I think we're talking to someone else in Europe as well, Dominique. So thanks again, Andrée, for joining this beautiful discussion. That made my Friday. So wishing both of you a good weekend. And any closing thoughts, Marc?
All I want to say is, thank you again to Andrée for joining us, and we look forward to seeing all of our viewers again next week.
And anyone that wants to reach Andrée Kenny in the UK, you want to share either your website or email, please go ahead.
Oh, I don't have it to hand. It's terrible. I wonder if I put it in the chat. Actually, hang on, I could just type it in, can't I? React Cam. Where is the? Oh, there, chat. Sorry, I haven't been on this before. It'll take me a few seconds. Can I just put it up the top there? Oh yeah, there. Look at it. It's very easy. It's just my name. AndreeKenny.com. Simple. There we go.
Perfect, thanks. So AndreeKenny.com, and it's Neuro Pathways.
Neuro Pathways is the name of my company, but if you just click on that on Google, you get straight in. Yeah, I'll put in my. Somebody already had a similar name. Pathways. What's the name of the company? Pathways. And I'm not
thanks
typing.
again to both of you, and thanks for the listeners always here with the shared laughter. We hear you laugh even though we don't see you. Thanks so much, Andrée, and wishing everyone a great weekend and a neuro curious weekend for everyone. Whatever your grade is, be curious, have fun.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone for coming.